what is a training space? A training space for me is a space of experimentation where, let's say you're putting an objective and then your whole point of, let's say, creating exercises, creating situations that the players are interacting in, is just a hypothesis. It's just say, this is the types of behaviors that I would like to upregulate. This is how I'm designing this space to produce these intrinsically in the player. If the whole point of what we're doing is trying to upregulate intrinsically certain behaviors, and I'm there telling them what to do, then we're corrupting the whole process. Are the players learning to live with the level of uncertainty and challenge and frustration that's inherent in this game? And key to doing this well, for me, is just remembering that you're dealing with humans that have an interest in making themselves better.
Hello coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach interview. This one is number 2 from my recent visit to Spain at Surf Cup International. I went and visited Espanyol for the day and met up with Paule-Carres. He is the methodologist at Espanyol. Unbelievable journey. We could have done 3 different podcasts in this. We could have done his journey from US to Spain, college soccer to Premier League methodologist. We could have done one on Espanyol itself and that relationship in Barcelona. And then we also could have done, towards the end of this conversation, we could have done a full one on youth methodology, different types of training, curriculums, planning, all that great stuff. Michael has said that he would jump on again. So please, if you enjoy it, please show your appreciation. Please like, please subscribe, please also comment as well. It really helps push the podcast, and share it with your coaching community. Thanks so much for the support. Here is Michael. Enjoy. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today on the pleasure. Modern Soccer Coach in a beautiful coffee shop in the middle of Barcelona. An American working at a head of methodology at a top club, one of the top academies in the world. How does that happen?
It's a long story. Luck and hard work. So I played in the United States at a D3 level, nothing special. Loved the game, grew up around the game. It was the only sport that I was ever interested in. So it was always kind of within me, but I never had, let's say, the thought of, I'm gonna go and coach, or I'm gonna go and be an analyst or whatever. It was just, I don't know, the environment that I grew up in kind of more provoked going toward getting a real career, so to speak. So I studied chemistry, worked as a chemist for a couple of years, hated it, and got to a crossroads. Am I gonna go do a PhD or a master's or a PhD in chemistry, whatever it was gonna be, or am I gonna pursue football? So I had a friend that went and did an MBA with Real Madrid in 2014, I think. He came back, he said, look, if you're gonna pursue a different career, it's great, but I think it might be interesting for you to go into football. This is a world that I had never thought about, and went for it. Started coaching, I did the same MBA, started coaching after that. So that was 2017, working adult levels, under 16s, under 14s. At a point after COVID, I got to a situation where, okay, what am I gonna do with this? How am I gonna find a way to, let's say, break into these higher level clubs? Because either you can work at it for 20 years and maybe get lucky one day based off of building a reputation or whatever it is, or you have to, let's say, do like what you would do in law school. How do you go and work at a top law firm? You go and do a master's degree. You go and find a situation where you're gonna be networking with people all the time. I did another master's degree with La Liga, and through that was based off of analysis, methodology, and sporting direction. Through that, I wrote 4 theses. The director of the master was the adjunct sporting director at Espanyol. So through the theses that I wrote, he said, look, this is a good fit for what we want to do. I'm going to take you. You're going to, if you're interested, you have 2 options. You can either be a scout for us based in Madrid. It's going to be easier for your lifestyle, or you can come and work within the methodology department. It's going to be more upheaval, but you're going to be living in a training center every day. You're going to meet everyone. It's going to be more enriching for you. So I did that, finished my stint there, and actually I didn't get a contract out of it. They just didn't have the budget. They were getting relegated at that point. We didn't know what the future was going to hold. I get a call then that July saying, look, we have a contract for you. When do you want to start? So that was that, basically. July 2023, I became full-time there, and I've been here to this day.
Wow. And not just like, I studied chemistry, because I studied business and there was no real highlights there. Chemistry's a different, like, you were on honor roll at your college in chemistry, so you were like, it wasn't, you weren't just doing chemistry though, you were flying in it?
Yeah, I was okay with it. I think that like I had an aptitude for figuring out, but it wasn't my passion.
Really?
You know, I didn't like working in the lab so much. I liked, let's say, the notion of being, I don't know, do you remember that show Nip Tuck? Yeah, I like the idea of being, let's say, Christian, being like the cool scientist that's gonna come in his Lamborghini and whatnot, but like, no, it wasn't a good fit. Just because you have an aptitude for something doesn't mean that you gotta go into it. My dad is a PhD. So he has a PhD in psychology, and I talked to him a little bit about what that process is like. He said, look, if you want to do it, great, but just recognize that this is something that's going to take over your life. Okay, I mean, not to such extreme levels, but I remember when I worked in a lab, my coworkers, what were their hobbies? Cooking, winemaking. Things that have like transferable skills toward working in a laboratory. And I just started to realize that there is no fantasy where you're going to be the different one and you're going to feel comfortable doing that. So it was, I don't know, once I started to say, okay, start studying a GRE one day and start studying football one day. Once that one day started becoming 2 days consecutive, 3 days consecutive, the decision was already made.
That's so interesting. All right, let's talk about Espanyol. So my first question, obviously, I was at the Barca game last night. I was at the B game the other night. Watched Barca for years and years. I didn't know the proximity of Espanyol to Barcelona, ignorant on my behalf, but actually now makes me so impressed that Espanyol has thrived when there's this massive machine next door. When Barca have obviously the global machine that they have, how do you as Espanyol differentiate? Do you differentiate yourself from them a little bit, or is that a risky thing to do, or how does that whole thing work?
For sure. I mean, you have to understand that there are certain cultural influences that are going to say, like, let's say if we're going to be a more direct way of playing, so to speak, it's not going to be just putting, let's say, 8 people behind the ball and launching long balls the whole time, but there does have to be a certain amount of verticality to what we're going to be doing. There does have to be a certain acceptance of the fact that because we don't have the money to go buy the best players, because of X different factors, you're not going to have a team that's generally going to dominate possession. So you have to find a way of being comfortable out of that, okay? Having said that, I don't want to say what the general identity of the club is because, you know, I'm not a lifelong fan of Espanyol. You know, I've been here for 3 years now, so I kind of get my own sense, which is it's not so much that we're upholding one political institution or another. It's not so much that we uphold one style of play or another. The sense that I've always had is that, say, Barcelona is, let's say, the popular one, and these are, so to speak, the outcasts, the ones that like to be a little bit counterculture for whatever, you know, in any sense of way. The ones that kind of thrive on being the black sheep, so to speak. That's really the sense that I've always had. And with that, it means that we can't, let's say, copy and paste their way of playing, their way of seeing the football. We have to do things a little bit our own way. Because if we try to do the same thing that they do, number one, it's going to be a cheaper version of them, so it's already going to be feeble. Number two, it's unrealistic. How are we generally going to have success trying to do something where we don't have the context that's going to give that life? So that's a little bit, let's say, how we've worked, let's say, in Barcelona's shadow, so to speak, but also fostering our own identity of what our history is. I mean, this is a club that was founded in 1900, has the 5th most seasons in the first division, has won major prizes, not that long ago. You know, he won Copa del Rey in 2000, 2005, Europa League final 2007. We're far in the Europa League, 4 years ago? So it's not a small club either. And traditionally, let's say, because you have such a competitive advantage here in the fact that there's Barcelona, there's us, and then you have Girona that's coming up now. But compared to Madrid, where you have 7 professional clubs, I'm not going to say that it's easy to produce top talent, but you know, it's a competitive advantage that you have to take advantage of. You know, so that's what we do. That's what we do.
You mentioned there about the different styles of play, maybe a more vertical style. In Spain, we just before we started recording, talking about this like next wave of Spanish talent, women's football, men's football, youth academies, Champions League, Spain. In your opinion, how much variation is there across the Spanish landscape of, does positional play dominate and there's variations of that, or is there variations of direct football and possession football?
Yeah, huge variety. Huge variety. If you go up to the Basque Country, for example, and you start to see, let's say, Athletic Bilbao or Athletic Club, how do they play? Osasuna traditionally, or let's say in the past 5 years or so, how do they play? You know, they have a huge amount of verticality, a huge amount of, let's say, they relish a physical duel. Here, you play against a lot of teams here. 90% of them against us are going to be in a low block, and they're going to be launching counterattacks the whole time. Of course, do you have your one or two that are going to be almost to a fault? I would say trying to play through the thirds when it's not on, yes. But yeah, you have a whole lot of variety. And I think that this is one of the strengths of the Spanish coach in general, is that it's not so much that you're taught you had to play positional play, you had to play through the thirds or this and that. No, you learn the game, you learn, say, general tendencies of what the game is on, let's say, collective, in terms of collective behavior, in terms of how is a line interacting, in terms of individual players based off of who they are. And how they act in different situations. And then from there, you're super adaptable. I think that's why there are so many coaches from here that are able to go abroad and have decent success. I'm not talking about just to, let's say, just to England, even though in England that's the dominant coaches these days are by and large Spanish coaches. But if you look at coaches that go to China, coaches that are going to Africa, coaches that are going all over the place, they're able to go and they're able to adapt to their context because their understanding of the game, not from a positional play style or anything else, but just what is it? How do we describe it? How do we understand it? Is really strong. Is really strong.
Oh, this is interesting. So go back to your chemistry mind, and you're saying, okay, so how do I formulate a plan, a methodology to teach this way to younger levels? Do you go? Is your head like beautiful mind type stuff where it's fractions and all this crazy stuff, or do you see it as pure? All right, 5v5. Get out of the way. Let them play. Like, where do you sit on the spectrum?
I think if you look at transferable skills from chemistry, just to go straight to the point. Organic chemistry, then I'm going to say this like an idiot a little bit because I've been out of it for over 10 years. A really strong skill point or skill that you need to have working in organic chemistry is spatial orientation, just to understand how different things fit together and create new molecules. Just to speak in broad strokes. That, of course, is going to have a lot of transferability to how you're seeing, let's say, your team of 7 versus 7 or 11 versus 11. One person jumps forward, what's the space left behind? What's the pace that you can occupy from this player making a run from the second line? Whatever it is. That, I found, has been transferable. But going back to the things that are a little bit more general, I think just having a more scientific approach to, number one, what is a training space? The training space for me is a space of experimentation where, let's say, you're putting an objective and then your whole point of, let's say, creating exercises, creating situations that the players are interacting in, it's just a hypothesis. It's just say, this is the types of behaviors that I would like to upregulate. This is how I'm designing this space to produce these intrinsically in the player, without me having to say, no, receive with your back to goal and lay off to this player. No, dribble forward. How can you produce this? It's going to be something that the player experiments with and does on his own accord, just based off of the construction of the surroundings around them. And then slowly and surely just giving them the space to experiment with trial and error. And just little touch points of, okay, you did this, how do you think this went? You did this, maybe try doing this and try doing this other alternative and see how it goes for you, okay? I think that's really where the role of, let's say, working in science has been transferable, is saying, and it's also similar to a Montessori methodology, where the teacher in a Montessori methodology is an observer and experimenter. And then their job is basically to leave the experiment as unperturbed as possible, so that you're getting realistic data points or realistic conclusions that are not biased by your own presence being there. Okay, I'm not saying that you had to be there silent the whole session, but if the whole point of what we're doing is trying to upregulate intrinsically certain behaviors, and I'm there telling them what to do, then we're corrupting the whole process.
Yes, I had an interview last week, Ray Power, implicit, explicit coaching. Mm-hmm. So are you saying there to be a bit more, that is the Montessori method, for you to go in there and do that as a coach in a soccer environment is highly skilled ability to do that? Is that more implicit learning? Is that less explicit? Do this, lock ankle?
Yeah, for sure. I think, if you go online and you look at what are the different principles of Montessori education, you're going to have different explanations. But let's say the main ones that I could say are transferable would be number one, creating autodidactic learning tools. That right there is exercise design. How are you creating an exercise that's going to produce the behaviors you want without me saying it? Done. Mixed stages. How are you able to, let's say, create an environment where, let's say, an older player is able to explain to a younger player what they do? Because an older player explaining it to a younger player is probably going to have a lot more buy-in than me doing it. But then on the other side, how is that younger player observing that older player that has, let's say, that's a little bit more coordinated without the ball, and are starting to imitate those types of actions, those types of decisions that the player is making, much more implicitly. I mean, it's the same with how do you develop one-on-one skill? Is he going and dribbling 25 times at a cone and doing a step over? Not for me. I remember watching players like Danielson or watching players like Valdo and seeing some of the things they did and went out to the backyard and try and do that on yourself, That's another, so it's another way that you're gearing more toward an implicit process. Minimize feedback, or not minimized to the point where, like, again, you're silent, but making it just as concise and uncorrupting as possible. That's another one. And then extending the amount of time that you're working with the player as much as possible. I think that due to what you're seeing in football, where you're going to be working at a high intensity, where you can't have a player doing high intensity actions for 25 minutes uninterrupted, that's not possible. But you can be very concise with, let's say, how you're dosing your feedback out. I always recommend to coaches do a 4-to-1 ratio. If you're going to be 4 minutes to play, then you have maximum 1 minute to talk. When I run a session, I have a watch set. And if I'm going to stop the session to talk, then I have 1 minute maximum. If I'm in the middle of a thought, then I've probably gone on too long. Then you just cut it off and then give them something to experiment with, to play with. And then with that, also understanding that if you're going to break an exercise down into 3 sets, 4 sets, the first one's going to be bad. Or not always, but there's an intrinsic sense of messiness that's going to come out of it. That should be expected. Okay, and then little by little, you build the house from there. And maybe toward the end, you're starting to get a little bit more stability in the behaviors that you want. You want to be provoking error. You want to be provoking situations where the player thinks that he has the right answer to solve a certain solution, but then maybe they misinterpreted their surroundings and they are able to learn from that mistake.
Hello coaches, we'll take a quick break here. As always, massive appreciation to everyone who has liked, subscribed, and followed up with comments on the work over the last month. As we have grown YouTube and Modern Soccer Coach platform, we have given a guarantee that with the numbers, we will also improve and increase the volume of work that we put out. And we just released a webinar with Hugo Vicente on the role of AI in football for free. Hugo delivered an hour with phenomenal level of understanding between the tech world and the soccer world in the next few years. Check that out. You can download it for free if you missed it on the link below. I'll put a link. We will keep looking to put out free content, more interviews coming up. You're not going to want to miss the third one of the Spanish methodology interviews coming up next week. Please make sure you subscribe. And if you want to go that one step further and support the work we do, please head on over to modernsoccercoach.com/shop. And we have coaching materials, we've got new ebooks out, we've also got opportunities for consultation, opportunities for mentorship that you might want to check out. As we build Modern Soccer Coach, we've also got costs as well, so if you want to help out, that would be amazing. modernsoccercoach.com/shop. We really appreciate it. Last thing, if you wouldn't mind sharing it to your coaching community, it also helps just build it, keeps the word out, and helps us improve and increase what we do. Thank you so much for all your support. Back to Michael. So this whole thing of, hey, today we're going to work on building up into the final third with rotations and giving the kids all the answers before then, and then hoping they remember it by an hour and a half later after they play a fun game. That's can we officially say that's ineffective?
I think that it's good to have, let's say, a starting point as to what's going to be the pillar that's going to develop what you're working on from start to finish. But then I think you had to be a lot more, let's say, purposeful. Number one, understanding what is football, which is intrinsically chaotic and intrinsically difficult to make good decisions in. And then taking them from a situation that's going to be a lot easier to recognize what's what's the right decision versus the wrong decision to resolve a situation. I'm not saying that there is a black and white, right or wrong, but getting a lot of repetition of this situation. Let's say this type of collective behavior that we're probably looking at to progress into the final third. that we want to work on. And then slowly and surely layering on context, layering on, let's say, more representativeness, but without losing that common thread. I think that's really where the meat in this is making sure that you're giving a real clarity within the first couple of exercises without making it just rote analytic. That's not bad either in certain contexts. But making it clear that, okay, this, if I'm working in a 2 versus 1 situation, this is a solution that might work against this profile defender. Understanding that I'm going up against, let's say, my teammate that's bigger, slower on the turn, whatever it may be, versus against a smaller one where maybe that situation isn't going to work, but this player is not as good profile defensively, so maybe I can take him on in a 1v1 situation, resolve the situation by myself, even if I have a free man. So giving them just as much repetition for trial and error as this is possible, and then slowly giving them more context as to, okay, we started to see how you might resolve a 2 versus 1 or a 2 versus 2 in a horizontal or vertical axis, whatever it is. More and more, when do these situations appear within the game, okay? And how can we take what we repeated, what we fine-tuned in this first exercise and start to apply it to resolve situations that we're looking at, whether that's getting past the back line or the final line of the defensive phase, whether that's isolating a player that's trying to press you high and finding the free man to progress on the far side, whatever it is. I think it's important to have, let's say, clarity as how the situation is going to help you later on, but not going straight forward into it. There's too much complexity.
Yeah, complexity. What a great topic, because now we're on, youth academy methodology, and you've been talking for 15 minutes and you haven't referenced once technique in isolation.
No.
So everything you've said is like, okay, there's dynamics, things that work, implicit, explicit, but I think people feel that whenever you look at a Spanish model, everyone gets caught up in North America about the technique must then get to decision making, and we go then into tactical understanding, and then all of a sudden we've got a footballer.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you have to have a purpose for separating, let's say, the technical action from the tactical element. If it's based off of building, let's say, a little bit more coordination with the ball, maybe for a 7-year-old, I buy it for 10, 15 minutes just to give him repetition. But it's not a teaching moment. I think we were talking about this earlier. I can't say with confidence that I can teach a player how to pass the ball or how to control the ball. My job, if I'm going to give him more, let's say, conscious knowledge about what's happening in their surrounding, is just to, let's say, provide, okay, if you're the player that's on the far side, what's your action within the team? Things where the player isn't, by the nature of the game, going to get a lot of direct feedback through his interaction with the ball, through the interaction with the defender. Those are moments where you can be a little bit more direct with your teaching. But in terms of, say, like raw technical work, that's something that, you do need, because the player needs a lot of interaction with the ball to understand how his body moves in alignment with the ball, with space, whatever it is. I think it just goes into, let's say, what's your, where are you going to dedicate your training time? Yeah. If I have an opportunity where you're getting 10 players, 12 players together, a key moment in learning about football is understanding my teammates, understanding how I act with a defender. How am I going to lose that stimulus just working with the ball, just working with the teammate without any sort of opposition when they can do this at home? So I think the key is not saying that, a player always has to be working under, with a defender. Player always has to be working in, small-sided games, whatever it is. But just being as efficient as possible with the time and the resources that we have. And then from there, trying to create a sense of attraction to training, to football, where the player is then going to take the ball to a wall, take the ball to the backyard, whatever it is, and just start to get that time, that added time with the ball that they need to have, let's say, a good relationship with the ball. But for me, it's more just about efficiency, not saying that you can't ever do one thing or another. In fact, there are times when you can provoke or provide an exercise without any defender. Why would you do that? Probably to upregulate certain non-habitual behaviors. Case in point, working with your weak foot. Number one, are you working with players that need to work on their weak foot or that have like a really marked need? Maybe if it's a player that's going to be working more, especially at older ages in the wide channels, do you need it? It's not going to hurt, but Is it the most efficient process? I don't know. Depends on a player-to-player case. In the central channel, of course, you need to be able to access all parts of the pitch. And normally if you have, let's say, a coordinative defect that's going to prevent you from feeling confident striking the ball with my left foot from here to here, yeah, it's something that you need to work on. But really, if you're going to be working on situations that are unopposed or that have very little opposition, what interests me less is the actual the execution of how they're passing, but more how are they perceiving their teammates? How are they separating themselves to give a good passing angle that's going to facilitate their next action, and understanding, and then also understanding if I'm the player who's going to be receiving the pass, when do I start to move to receive with an advantage? When do I decide that, okay, based off of the supporting action that my teammates made, he's probably going to have a hard time making a pass at this angle instead of this angle, so I position myself there. That's where the magic might be in a more unopposed type of exercise, much less in the actual execution. So I think that if you're going to propose an exercise like that, you have to be very direct and very concise with the purpose.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being very direct, again, going back to game understanding, game intelligence, these things that, again, North America we view as the promised land for player development, and probably rightly so. In Spain, Espanyol, there seems to be this thing in America that, again, I don't know whether it's more education or more information. Doug Lemov's done some great work in this space, but I think a lot of coaches, myself included, struggle where, you know, when you start to guided learning, guided discovery, they call it, and you ask questions. And do you guys work like that? Is that something you found successful, or?
I like using questions and answer types of feedback. Why? Because you can get an actual sense of what the player's thinking, what the player's seeing, what the player's feeling. So yeah, there's a lot of value, I think, in engaging the player in that sense and making sure that the answer that we're arriving at is a collaborative effort, not me spoon-feeding answers. Does every piece of feedback have to be a question? Of course not. I think there are times when you had to be not direct to make sure that you're getting the right behavior, but to make sure that we're orienting their focus of attention toward the right source of information. Let's say you pull a player aside and say, look at this player, how he's receiving to his back. He's putting his arm well here, so he's able to create separation, and he's able to, buy the time to get players running forward to lay off to, for example. It's all, again, are we creating a situation where the player is just accepting our information with us being an authority source? Or are we creating a situation where maybe we have to be a little bit more direct just to make sure that the learning process is taking place, but then from there, once you're giving a more directed command, so to speak, getting some sense of way of understanding that there actually has been a learning process taking place. Understanding that the player grasps why we propose what we proposed, okay? And then if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. The players, we don't have the divine truth to everything. I think that's more the answer, is that questions are good, but it's not the cure-all either.
Periodization, not tactical periodization, but periodization of the tactical methodology. When you're looking at that layering that at a youth level, how do you structure that? Do you do attack an organization? Do you do a 1 week, one theme? Do you sprinkle it in together? How does that all work?
So to give a little bit more stability, just so that the players have more time to interact with different environments, I usually will hold one situation of play. Let's go back. Let's say we have three training sessions a week. First day is going to be, I don't want to say focus on individual developments per se, but a lot of times I put them in context where they're going to be in the attacking half against a low block for two reasons. Number one, this is going to make space that much more valuable to be interpreting and working within, and also making sure that, let's say, your technical execution has to be spot on, has to be a lot more a lot better, just because of the higher challenge that's involved. So that's going to be driving improvement more rapidly than, let's say, just doing a possession to build out from the back, where maybe you're going to be coming up against a team that's high pressing, maybe not. Number two is something that's relevant to the players. We're in a situation where we face this every single week. And I think that if you're proposing these types of situations, you're starting to not necessarily say this is how we're going to beat this opponent, but you're starting to create some behaviors that are very rich. The ability to understand my function as the third man. not just knowing that I'm going to receive it, but understanding when am I supposed to be separating from a marker, what space am I supposed to be, say, moving into to make sure I'm receiving with advantage. The ability to, we talked about this earlier, making runs into space, let's say attacking, let's say lines of pressure. I don't know if you saw the goal versus Pedro Neto versus Arsenal for Chelsea. Yeah. Amazing off the ball movement, recognizing, okay, this line of 4 here, they want to be maintaining a certain amount of spacing as they're not completely drawn back into their back 4, but they're also being a little bit passive. Maybe this movement going from here to here is going to create a problem for this player here. Do I drop back and follow my runner? Do I hold the space that I'm doing? And then this player here, if he's a little bit too wide, is also within no man's land a little bit. So these types of movements of recognizing that I can be proactive and break lines of pressure, not just with the ball, but also with my movement. These are the types of behaviors that are very rich to start developing even at a younger age, starting to recognize that this is valuable space that we want to be attacking. And interesting things can start to happen once you start to develop those habits. Taking your first touch forward, making sure that you're scanning both sides, not just in the attacking phase, but on the defensive phase. These are all things that we start to look at on Mondays a little bit more. Wednesdays, I would call it, say, more like a vaccination day, where I'm going to just give, let's say, I'll hold it a little bit more stable, but let's say for 4 weeks, we'll be working in one situation of the play, or whether that's going to be in our half or the opponent's half, okay? And that can be in the attacking phase, defensive phase, whatever. You can't work the two isolated, okay? You can, of course, give more feedback toward one phase or another, but how can I, let's say, teach a player how to break down a low block if the low block is doing a bad job? You're not creating a situation that's going to be really challenging for the player. So I think you had to be working both simultaneously to reach a certain objective that you're looking for. So that's more on Wednesday.
Yeah, let's stay on that, because I think there's a huge level of complexity with that when you're looking at planning. So are you saying there that, okay, even though that has a focus on attack and organization in breaking down the block, centre backs are not standing at the halfway line passing at 5 yards. Your centre backs are actually being coached as the block. Is that what you're saying?
For sure. Or if you're going to do an attack versus defense type of situation, the centre back is going to have direct impact in what the situation is going to be. But another thing that we do a lot, and this is something that I would encourage people to reflect on and to introduce as much as possible, is a second ball. Let's say you're going to let's say you're creating an attack versus defense 6 versus 5, just to invent something, and it's broken into 3 zones. And let's say once you bypass this 3 versus 2 and you finish in this half, you have a second ball over here that's going into a 2 versus 2 going to mini goals. Just to give a quick example. What's happening there is that every player at the very least has the opportunity to live all 4 phases of play in the same exercise. This is something that's really important for me, because this game goes more and more into transitions. This game goes more and more into situations where you had to be on your toes all the time. So being able to put that in as a stimulus and say, okay, you did your job in the attacking phase, but now all of a sudden you had to change your hat and go in a whole different way of functioning. It's really enriching. And it's something that instead of having players that are defending for 10 minutes straight and are bored out of their skulls, they get something. They get something to, let's say, keep them alive. Yeah. And then when it gets richer is that maybe in this 3 versus 2, the 2 recover the ball, the second ball goes in this direction, and you create a 4 versus 3 in this part of the pitch. They're not easy to implement, because you need to have a lot of coordination with your coaching staff to understand when's the ball going to go into which player in which context. But that's how you get there.
But Michael, sell that T-shirt. Live all 4 phases of having players 100%. Live all 4. It's
the exact same with let's say your rondos or positional games. Where what do you have for your transitions? You're finishing in mini goals. Why? That's not. I mean, that is a transition, yes. But why not put a neutral here, and then your transition is finding the free man in space, okay, and then expanding out, and then trying to create an attacking structure from there. That's what it is to live in the 4 phases of play. Not saying, oh, I got the ball, I finished in a mini goal, and the other team had to do they're going to do a counter press no matter whether it's a mini goal or not if they do it well. So just be a little bit more thoughtful about how are we creating these situations so that every player, like you said, has the chance to live every phase. If they don't do it well, then they might be defending a lot, but it's up to them. It's up to them. And then if we start to see that, then you as a coach, even if we're working in an attacking type of situation, maybe you have to give a little bit of support to the defensive phase. Number 1, to give them a certain opportunity to improve their errors, but also number 2, to make sure that the attacking phase is getting an appropriate level of challenge. So,
what are you doing Thursday then? This is awesome.
Thursday is, so you have to understand a little bit the competitive context that we work in. Most of our matches are 9-0, 10-0, 11-0. What happens? That's not, I mean, is it football in the sense that you're playing, in our case, 7 versus 7? Yeah. Keep in mind, this is for the 7-a-sides. 11-a-sides is a lot more competitive. But is it the emotional level of football? Are players learning to live with the level of uncertainty and challenge and frustration that's inherent in this game? No. So what we started to do is propose for the 40 minutes, matches between teams. Sometimes you mix, most times not. And that's really valuable, I think, for your under-10s playing against the under-11s after winning 9-0, 10-0, having to suffer. You know, I'm not saying that you want them to be having a bad time or anything like that, but they have to understand that this is an inherent part of the game that they have to learn how to deal with. So we do that more or less every week. We have a certain rotation as to how do we do it. And even though, let's say, it's not out of the textbook, this is what you're supposed to be doing for coaching methodology, everybody loves it. Everybody loves it. The coaches live it. It's not just your typical 7 versus 7 where the coaches are there talking about the weekend or whatnot. No, they're living the process too. The players are properly into it because they're in a situation where if I'm the younger team, I can, maybe bloody the nose of the players that are older than me. It surprised me how well received it was. So we started doing that in September. I have a running tally of who scores goals against the better teams or the older teams versus who's only scoring goals against the weaker teams versus what are the results for each match. Because let's say if you're going to play for 40 minutes, normally what I do is I break it into 4 8-minute halves. So instead of losing 6-0, maybe you lose 2 matches 2-0, draw 1 1-1, and then lose the other one 2-0. Just speaking off the top of my head. So that's a situation where, okay, you as a team, even though you're living in a context that's going to be very difficult to win, you can get your small wins every now and again. And then maybe the coaches can work within each other and say, look, I'm having this problem with my team breaking down a low block, or I'm having this problem with my team using a build-up with 2 players when we're being pressed with 2. Maybe let's condition the match a little bit to make sure that teams are living these moments and getting the chance to correct certain actions that either a certain individual player has or that certain interactions that come up between a team. So we do that. We do that for the second half. The first half, I'd like to put as much finishing as possible, especially with younger ages. And we talked about this earlier. It's just important to have as many repetitions in front of goal as possible. It's a key decisive factor, and I can't have it that my center back, if the game's going more and more into transitions, more and more important in set pieces, a chance falls to my center back at 90 minutes, and because he's not comfortable in that situation, he passes sideways or he misses. No, I mean, there has to be a certain flexibility in our players to be able to take advantage of what the game gives us. It doesn't have to be so much that everyone has to be a Bernardo Silva, everyone has to be a jack of all trades, but to have a certain level of competency, especially in front of goal, I think is important.
Brilliant. All right, last few for you. I went to the Champions League game last night and I saw the Barcelona. I was thinking player profiles, and I'm thinking, they're not the tallest, not the biggest. Every 50-50 challenge, every opportunity to repress, block tackles, track and runners, every physical action, they didn't just succeed, they excelled at it. Is there a physical profile that we're not talking about at this level? Do you need to be quick, strong, athletic, even if you're 5'1"?
I think we have to redefine what strength is in a football context. I think that a lot of times we're looking at, I'm not a fitness coach, so I should preface it by saying that before going all sciencey and everything. But I get the sense that we have a misunderstanding that strength is hypertrophy, whereas strength in a football context needs to be much more based off coordinated actions. Look at a player like Raheem Sterling. Yeah, he has a good, he has big legs, but how is someone that's this tall able to hold off massive center backs? Because he's able to position his body well. He has probably really optimized contractions and relaxations within his hamstrings, within his quads, so on and so forth. So that's a lot. It's a lot more specialized strength, a lot more focused on, okay, how can we maximize the amount of force that we're producing? That's something that, I think you need to work on, and it needs to be part of how you're working as fitness coaches, how you're working as a high performance department. One thing that we do is we have accelerometers that we put on a bar. So instead of measuring the weight that you're lifting when you're doing a bench press, when you're doing a clean, whatever it is, it's how fast is the action, how explosive is the action. And that's where you're able to overload, underload a player based off of, I'm not going to enter into this because I don't go into the gym with them, but something that's going to be a lot more transferable to a football action, understanding that our contractions are coordinated, understanding that it's going to be much more based off of explosive strength to make for those actions that really make the difference. So that's where you may have a player that's like this, but is super wiry, has sharp elbows, and is able to hold off two players at once. And also that, and also their timing of when do they arrive. Look at a player like Phil Foden. This guy never receives stopped. He's always running toward the ball, so there's always that little bit of separation to take that first touch away from the defender before the defender's even able to react. I was at the match last night, Sporting Arsenal. Havertz is a big boy, but at the same time, his ability to threaten going in behind, and then darting into the space in between the lines to act as a reference, you're just seeding the sense of uncertainty into a defender. Do I go? Do I stay? Do I drop off? Do I hold the line? And that's how you're able to get these, let's say, split seconds where, okay, number one, you're able to receive and coordinate yourself with the ball, where you have a lot more of a stable base. So you're able to handle that pressure. Number two, the defender's going late. They're already a little bit more reactive. So if their timing of their jump forward is going to be a little bit farther off, so you're able to roll off that. You're able to hold it off. You're able to understand what's coming. So I think that there are two different approaches you could take. One purely physiologically based, one understanding the game so that you're able to work in a way that's going to give you an advantage.
And it brings us on nicely to the last question, the money ball. So the American solution, obviously you probably get asked this 100 times, but what you know now and what you read and see in our landscape and our environment, not giving you a blank check and $1 million to come and fix it, but I'm giving you $1 million to say, here's where you start. I'm going to come back in 6 months and get this done first, and then we're going to go, what's the first thing that you think, before we do anything else, to play a style and to get this culture of Spanish football, can we even do that?
I don't think that it's the right approach to try to go toward say, a Spanish football style. Because we're not Spain, we're the United States.
So what is our culture?
That's a good question. I think that's something that would be, I don't want to say that we had to be married to one style of play, one way of acting for such a multicultural country, but I think it might benefit us to start to think, okay, what values do we enjoy seeing in our athletes? Whether that's in football, whether that's in basketball, whether that's in American football, whatever it is. Is there something that's intrinsically attractive to us in these sports that maybe you can use to create, let's say, I don't want to say a game model, but let's say certain ways of playing that might resonate with the spectator that's seeing it. So I think it might be interesting to look into, let's say, what are profiles of other sports that people already associate with, okay, an American style of play. What's an American style of basketball, for example? Are there common traits that you can take from that and say, all right, maybe this is something that might be interesting to apply to football? If the question is, how do you get $1 million and you come in and you have to make a change that's going to be, let's say, long lasting?
Yeah.
Grassroots level.
Yeah.
Grassroots level. Because I mean, I think we've seen, okay, there are a lot of academies that by what the book says, do things right. They have their periodization model right based off of what studies would say. They have good coaches. If the players that are coming through don't have, let's say, so much exposure, understanding, okay, I'm in a 3 versus 2, I'm able to detect a free man like that, and I understand how to work in these types of settings, you're limited. You're limited because you're now working at an under 13, under 14, under 15, under 16 age groups where the focus inherently is going to be more toward the collective. This is just where these training methodologies tend to go. But you're working with players that maybe their decision making isn't quite as fine-tuned with finding the free man, with understanding how do I create an advantage in a 2 versus 2 type of setting. This needs to be built from a younger age, from understanding, number one, how are we creating a real attraction between the player and the ball, so that the player isn't just getting better at training, but is doing it on their own at home. And I do a lot of work with this with with the under 11s, under 12s specifically at Espanyol, giving them more exposure to the football culture, giving them, let's say, a little bit of stimulus to say, okay, you did this in training, go home and, here are the videos that you did. Go home and reflect on it. How'd you do? Is it mandatory? No. But just inviting them to have a little bit more thoughtfulness about the game, about professional references that they might see, and building an attraction like that, an attraction that I had when I was younger. And that I think that is complicated to foster if everything is just geared toward training. So yeah, grassroots and just making sure that we're developing that love for the game. And also we're just creating some basic habits within our players that are going to serve them well when it's time to go into more complex systems in 11 versus 11. Because I think that is the thing, the technical level in the United States, from what I've seen, is it's fine. I don't think that there's so much of a problem there. It's really understanding, okay, how do I apply this? How do I apply my skill set? It doesn't have to be a perfect skill set. I don't have to be dribbling through 5-6 players. But how do I apply what I can do with and without the ball to help make my team better? And I think number one, we had to understand what is our team, what are we trying to do? And then number two, what is my role within that team? Okay, and if you're able to create players that have a certain ability to transfer that, then you're getting there.
Brilliant. All right, I'm going to sneak one more.
Sure.
Coach development, because I know I'm going to have 5 coaches reach out to me after this and say, yeah, they're going to bug you either on LinkedIn or they're going to want your information. And what they're going to want to do is ask you, is because they kind of come from more of an academic world, see the game a little bit more. Is it right-sided brain? Is that the...
Yeah. It's going to be a little bit more rational.
Rational.
Yeah.
I think there is a community building in America, because obviously there's the college system, and so coaches are normally coming from the academic backgrounds. And you're coming, like, it's such a fascinating role. Your background's fascinating on paper, but when you talk about it, I hear the references towards that, and I like, it's amazing. What advice would you have for someone who is coming from it from that perspective, and they're looking now and saying, I want to do what you're doing?
Ahead of anything else, ahead of all the theory, recognize that you're working with people. That's it. If you're a coach, if you're an analyst, if you're whatever, you're working with human beings at the end of the day. And this theory is very good at describing how things work. I like reading scientific papers. I like understanding a little bit more, how does this game work? What is, how do our bodies work, whatever it is. But the key to doing this well, for me, is just remembering that you're dealing with humans that have an interest in making themselves better. And if you're able to lay that seed of saying, I'm here not to tell you what to do, but to just accompany you in this process and say, okay, this is what you're doing, this is what you do well, this is what you can do even better. Here's a professional reference to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, in case all this that's coming out of my mouth sounds like nonsense. But no, just understand, like, if you're able to create that connection with another human being, they're gonna follow you. It doesn't matter if you're talking with a 21-year-old, whether you're talking with an 11-year-old, anything. That's where the magic in coaching is understanding how do you manage, or not even manage, how do you work alongside other human beings to help them maximize their potential.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Wow, Michael, killed it. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. We'll do it again. All right, coaches, I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. It was an unbelievable opportunity to spend the afternoon with Michael and talk about his path, and also talk about what they're doing at Espanyol. It wasn't enough time. I had to run off to get the bus to go back to the tournament. So I had to apologize to Michael that we could have sat there for hours and hours. Unbelievable insight, unbelievable journey. Big takeaways for me, number one, is that piece that he's talking about of keeping the game at the center of what you're doing. Also living the 4 phases and challenging that basic transitional, hey, into the mini goals, and counting that as a transitional moment. And I completely agree with him. You see it a lot in session design. Yeah, there's a transition, but is it a real transition? Is it a challenging transition? Is it a transition that replicates the one that you're going to look for in the game with that aggressive counter press or that aggressive counter attack? Not really. It's one pass into the mini goals and then everyone goes yes, and the game continues, and he's right there. But I thought that was a common theme throughout his interview. I thought challenging the way we look at it, being really purposeful of our planning, but also, as he said at the end, keeping people at the center of it, and also coming back to the relationship between the player and the game, I think is a massive, massive point. That sometimes, again, the word methodologist and Michael's background in that chemistry word would lead him to a world of numbers and shapes like people like me wouldn't understand, but it's not. It's interesting that alongside the meticulous planning and the direction and the strategy, you also have this essence of the game at the center of it. And I find that really, really refreshing, and I find that really powerful. So I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I really appreciate the support. If you're listening and you've stayed on for me talking about my reviews, which I do for the live events, please make sure you like it. Please make sure you subscribe. Please make sure you don't miss next week's last interview on the Spanish methodology. It's a big one, I promise you. You're going to really love it. So make sure you subscribe. And last thing, if you would go ahead and share it with your coaching community. It's just one little thing that makes a big, big difference to what we do, because it increases our ability to impact the coaching community, reach new coaches, speak to new coaches, and hopefully keep these interviews going. So thank you so much for the support. I really enjoy putting out the work, so I couldn't do it without, again, all the likes, all the subscriptions. Please keep it coming. Thanks so much. See you next week. Goodbye.